Welcome to Preaching and Teaching the Old Testament. I want to review what we have gone over as far as the format is concerned. There is in your email and also in news and announcements the template. It's a general template that you will be following. And that's the template that we have been following. We've been working on with each of the assignments. But I want to go over it just one more time because it's not quite clear yet. So we're looking at three general sermon styles: the deductive, where the MPS, main point of the sermon, is at the beginning of the sermon, and the inductive is the MPS, main point of the sermon is at the end, or in the middle, or at the end. Then you have this inductive deductive, which is sort of like the general template, where you inductively, through your introduction, lead up to the MPS. In your introduction, you have the attention step, interest step, introduce the subject step, and then your MPS, and then you deductively develop it. So it's sort of like the inductive deductive. And that's a definition from Haddon Robinson's book. So here's the deductive. MPS is at the beginning, and then it's developed. There's your introduction, interest step, attention step, introduce the subject step, and we'll be talking more about the introduction a little later. But in the introduction, you'll see this in the template that I posted in news and announcements and in your email. It has two parts right here. I didn't include them right here. But you have the theme of the book. Under this you could put A, theme of the book, B, development of the theme of the book. And I do that so that your passage will fit into the theme of the book and where that theme is developed, putting it in the context. And then the inductive is where you lead up to the MPS. You have a problem, you have a solution. You have the problem, this is not the solution, nor this, but this. That's the idea. And that's more characteristic of narratives, as we have talked about, but there are some epistles that would fit that. Then you have this inductive deductive, where again, you lead up to the theme, MPS, and then you deductively develop it. Okay? It's based on the simple plot, as we have talked about, which has a beginning with the conflict, which has a middle with the resolution, and then it comes to an end. Then you have, I'm just going to go through this. I think you comprehend it, plotting the sermon from exegesis to exposition, where in each scene you make a summary statement that will become the timeless principle and the main divisions. But that doesn't mean you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 main divisions. And I did not bring this out last time, so now's a good time to emphasize this. These three timeless principles here could be combined into one main division. So you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, which is much more workable and easier to understand. So again, you want this summary statement in your scenes, and you want the same thing if you're doing a sermon from Hebrew poetry. You're doing a psalm, you want to find the stanzas. If you're doing a proverb, you'll also want to find the main divisions. But first, let's say you're doing Proverbs 1 to 7, where you have a lengthy admonition. Then you would break that down, and you would first give a summary statement. What did it mean to the original audience? And then from that, you bring a timeless principle. What will it mean to my audience? The summary statement will help you get your timeless principle and your main divisions. We talked about the 10 different styles, narrative styles. These are the more common. These are deductive. And that template that I put in the news and announcements and the email is based on this. And in that email and news announcement, I said, if you're choosing one of these inductive, then you will modify that. And I'll explain that. So here's the deductive narrative. This is the demand proposition, or MPS. I'm using MPS more so now, but proposition was more common in the past. Here's the template. You're going to have a sermon title, you're going to have the text, you're going to have your introduction, and you're going to have your MPS. In that introduction, I left it out because I just couldn't squeeze it into this slide. Just remember, the introduction includes, this is in the template that's in your news and announcements. You have an attention step, interest step, lead into the subject step, and the lead into the subject step has two parts: a theme of the book and then how that theme is developed. And you can see in 1 Samuel, the theme of the book is God sovereignly raises up leaders. How is that developed? Samuel, chapters 1 to 6, Saul, 7 to 15, David, 1 Samuel 16 to the end of 2 Samuel. So if you're doing a sermon here, you're saying, here's the first leader that God has sovereignly raised up. God is sovereignly raising up Samuel in chapters 1 to 7. There's your demand there's your demand MPS. We must overcome the barrenness of leadership. Interrogative, how can we overcome? Now, in the template that's in your news and announcements, you might choose why. Why should we overcome? And if you choose how, you'll say by the following example of Hannah, or by taking these steps. If you choose why up here, why should we overcome, your transition would be because of the following reasons. That's in the template. Then you have your main divisions. This is important right here. That you have these 4 rhetorical processes. Okay? These need to be listed. A, this is the template. All of this needs to be in your sermon, and what I've included under introduction. You need an explanation. You need to put a explanation, then your paragraphs. Argumentation. This is a cross-reference or systematic theology. It's not going to be as long as explanation. What I saw in the sermons turned in last week was more explanation under argumentation. So a lot of that explanation, you could just move, that you had in argumentation, you could just move it up to explanation. This is cross-references. This is systematic theology. This is not more explanation. Then your illustration and your application. All of those need to be under each main division, each Roman numeral. All right? And then you have your conclusion. And your conclusion has 2 parts. It has summarizing, going back and restating the MPS and your main divisions. You want to recap. And then you want to give that final exhortation, that final application. That's where you ratchet up and you really exhort them to do the main point of the sermon. This is your template here with the additions that I've put into news and announcements. Then you have the variations of that. You have the declaration. That's simply where you make the demand MPS into a declaration. So not much is going to change there. And I'm just going to step through these quickly until I get to this one, the question. Again, not much change, it's just tweaking it a little bit. And in here, basically you're just leaving out the MPS because your question is the MPS, put in the form of a question. How can believers overcome the barrenness of leadership? Then everything else is the same. All right? I just want to walk through this so that as you're preparing, you're getting now to the point where you're going to choose a form or style. You're going to use the deductive or you're going to use the inductive. So here's the biblical problem, biblical solution, and you have the problem, and then you have the solutions. Okay, built on that makeup of a narrative, which is a biblical problem and a biblical solution. Hidden outline. The hidden outline is basically the biblical solution, biblical problem, biblical solution, not emphasizing Roman numeral 1 and the A, B, C, D under it. That's all it is. This sermon is exactly like the biblical problem, biblical solution, except the outline is not stressed. You're emphasizing more in telling the story than getting across that outline. That's the only difference. You can go back and review the first video where I spent a little more time on these explanations, but what I'm trying to do with this review is just help you see that the main ingredients of the sermon. The narrative applications, again, notice you're going to have the rhetorical processes, but just in different places. I mentioned that in the template that I put in news and announcements. Look, explanation, argumentation under scene 1. Under scene 2, explanation, argumentation. Under scene 3, explanation, argumentation. This narrative application is just pulling the illustration and application to the end of the sermon, not giving it here under each main division, but pulling it to the end. So you're giving just, in other words, this is a variety in presenting a narrative. But again, you have all the rhetorical processes just in different parts of the sermon. Instead of being in the body of the sermon, illustrations and applications are at the end. I hope that makes sense. Then you have the pure narrative, which we have modified. A pure narrative, according to this homiletician, is you tell this, you start at the beginning, you end at the end, and basically no application. We don't want to do that. We're going to modify it by having one application and illustration at the end. Again, scene 1, you explain, argue. Scene 2, you explain, argue. Scene 3, the same. You have with this one application. How is this different from narrative applications, plural? With the narrative applications, you have as many applications at the end as you have main divisions. With the pure narrative, we modified it. You have one illustration and one application. The application of the main point of the sermon. It gives you a little variety. Again, the frame does have an introduction. It does have a conclusion. But again, it's like the pure narrative, where you have main divisions with explanation, argumentation under each, and at the end you have your conclusion, which is your story, illustration, and your application. One application. There, just talk about the narrative and the frame a little bit. We've already discussed that. All right. The first person, I'm not going to dwell on this. If you choose to do that, that's fine. It's just not a very common sermon, as we have talked about. So I'm going to get to the inductive. Deductive. Again, this is built on the chiastic structure that you've been reading about, and it's just a part of Hebrew thinking and literary thinking in the Old Testament, with narratives and with Hebrew poetry. But you can build your sermon on that concept, and if you do, it's sort of, as I mentioned earlier, the main point is here. See the big idea? You have inductively led up to it, and then you are now deductively developing it. But again, my point is, All these rhetorical processes are in there. They just may be rearranged for some of these sermons. So I hope that's a good review. If you have questions, please let me know. And especially as we're getting near to the end now, and you're going to be choosing a style. What we've been doing is just doing the basics. But now you can get to the point where you choose a style and you'll be rearranging some of these main ingredients in a sermon or Bible study.